All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to On the Spectrum podcast. I am Nick, and this is Steve. As always, at the beginning of every episode, I'm going to go into my, warning or whatever the fuck it's going to be.
Trigger warning.
We do not presume to be, nor do we think that we are experts in anything whatsoever, including autism. We are just two human beings who happen to be on the spectrum, and we wanted to talk to you about things that affect autistic people and or just in general our opinions altogether. We do use some foul language on this, and we may use terms and phrasings that you may or may not like. Here's what I will say. Give it a shot. Listen. I think that was all I needed to say. Yeah?
Sweet.
All right.
So today we're going to talk about masking. And I'm not talking about the tape.
Yeah, we're going to talk about masking.
Not the tape. We're not painting.
No painting involved. I don't think either one of us are skilled painters at all.
Nick, why don't you give us the definition of masking?
Because like a good autistic, I looked it up. All right. So it says here, all I did was type into Google masking autism. Masking is a word used to describe something seen in many children with ASD. Hopefully they also mean adults. When they learn, practice, and perform certain behaviors and suppress others in order to be more like the people around them. That's masking.
So to make normies feel more comfortable.
Yeah, to make normies feel comfortable.
So like things like trying to maintain eye contact, which is something that a lot of people on the spectrum, it doesn't come to us naturally necessarily. We tend to not always look at somebody when they're talking to us or make eye contact, even if we're listening. So people think we're not listening because apparently normal people, that's what they do.
Because it's uncomfortable. For anybody listening who doesn't understand it, making eye contact, looking at people's faces, it's kind of uncomfortable. I was raised in a household where we didn't know I was autistic. So like I was raised like a normal kid, right? I was raised like a normie. And so I was always told to make eye contact. And though it is uncomfortable for me to do it, I have tendency to ignore that feeling and I just make eye contact anyway, even though at the same rate, I've been told I'm way too intense when I look at people.
Yeah. And I used to get yelled at all the time by people who, just in relationships, but also just in general, like, work or any social environment, people would get angry or yell at me and be like, why aren't you listening? Why aren't you being? I'm like, I am listening.
Yeah.
They're like, no, you're not. Okay. How do you know that I'm not? Cause like you're in my head, you know that I'm not listening. Cause I am, but okay. Right. And I'd repeat back to them exactly what they said.
Right.
And they're like, well, you should look at people when they're talking to you. I'm like, okay.
No, I don't. I'm still listening. One thing I will say about that too is like, yes, they're trying to hold us to their standard, right? Their social expectation standard. At the same time, is it beneficial for us to do that because they will feel more listened to and they will feel more valid or accepted by us if we look in their general direction? Yes. So one thing I did learn, which I'll put out there, and probably a lot of you have heard this before, look at the person's forehead or look at their nose. I always hated the nose one because it's still too close to the eyes. But like, look at their forehead. If you're a guy, try to avoid looking down when talking to a female. They'll automatically assume you're looking at their chest. Even though you're not, you're just trying to avoid eye contact, but still. Here's a couple examples of autism masking. And I think we can relate with this a great deal. Mimicking the social behavior of others, including gestures or facial expressions.
Monkey see, monkey do.
Yes. I very much can relate to that one. First time I ever heard about mimicking in this regard about autism, I immediately was like, oh my God, I do that all the time. Oh my God, I'm always trying to act like these people. And I would always try to hide some of the social or verbal stuff that I would do that I guess is closer to being autistic. And I would constantly try to act like them. I would try to enjoy the same shows.
I think a lot of it, at least for me, was not necessarily to always fit in, but some of it was just so people would leave you alone.
Right. Well, that's what I mean.
To not draw attention to yourself or to like not be the weirdo, the creep.
Yeah. Well, I was
to quote Tom York,
a great deal of an issue with being accepted, or at least feeling like I was accepted. I mean, as I became an adult and now I'm in my early 40s, I found out that people accepted me, but I just didn't know that they accepted me, or I couldn't accept the fact that they accepted me. But I always kind of took it as nobody like wanted me in their circle, if you will. And for a very long time, I thought nobody liked me whatsoever because I was odd, or at least I thought I was odd. Um, One thing I will say about mimicking is by no means do I advocate for people on the spectrum, especially where we sit on the spectrum, whether you want to call it Asperger's syndrome or high function autism or just a different part of the spectrum, however you want to word that. One thing I do advocate is knowing their rules, not necessarily trying to hide your autism per se, but like knowing what their social rules are, which can be hard for us because we don't necessarily learn them the same way by watching people, but learn what the rules are, because like all of us have to get jobs, we all want to be in relationships. I mean, I've never heard somebody on the spectrum say, man, fuck everybody, I don't want to be in a relationship. I mean, some people probably get to that point because they've had so many issues with connecting with people, but knowing their rules is a beneficial thing because it also lets the other person who's a normie or not on the spectrum, it lets them feel validated and accepted. So we don't want them to feel the exact same way that we have felt because of other people.
It also helps if you're trying to be a stable adult with a job.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I say on the flip side of it, I think that people who are close to someone who's on the spectrum or friends with somebody or in a relationship, they should also understand the mental toll that it can take masking all day.
Oh, yeah.
If you have to constantly be aware of and changing your behavior to
Yeah.
make yourself suitable for other people, that it does kind of wear you out, or after a while it can be very exhausting. So I know when I used to work in sales, I had to deal with the public all day. And when I got home at the time, I was in a relationship, and I used to go home and just shut off and play a video game or just watch TV and zone out for a few hours.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do anything or talk to anybody. And then of course my girlfriend would come home and then want to talk my ear off about her day. And I'm like, no, I can't do this right now.
Yeah.
At the time I didn't know that I was on the spectrum.
Right.
But in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense. She used to get mad at me because I didn't want to listen to her. She thought I didn't care about her or her day, but I'm like, no, I just need a break. I've been listening to people and talking to people all day. And I didn't understand at the time why it was so exhausting for me to have to maintain eye contact with the customers and look at them and make sure they knew I was listening. Although if you work in certain types of field sales environments, like if you work in any sales environment where you get to be on a computer, that helps because you can look at the computer while you're filling shit out. So if you're working, I used to work for a cell phone company, and it was nice because I could just be in the computer looking at their account and talking to them and didn't have to look at them because I had an excuse not to look at them. I was looking at the computer.
I think I read the term the other day, or at least I'm going to say the term. Hopefully it's actually a real thing, but it's basically autism burnout. You know, it's an emotional burnout for us. We deal with other people and we're masking so hard and we're trying so much to be like them so we can get done whatever we got to get done. By the end of our day, we're just burnt out. We just don't want to do that anymore. We don't want to play by their rules anymore.
So
which is a thing for us.
Go on Reddit and go into a rabbit hole for 3 hours and read about something,
or Reddit, something I don't like,
or play a video game and zone out for a few hours, or just something to kind of, I don't know, shut my brain off for a while.
Play video games, maybe just get sucked into a TV show.
Yeah, which I do less of than you. I mean, I watch TV and I watch movies, but I was always more of a gamer. I liked doing something interactive rather than just watching.
Right.
But that's just me.
What was I going to say? As I'm reading this, when it comes to mimicking and kind of subverting the way we actually feel by or acting another way and kind of pushing away the way we want to do things and trying to act like them, it kind of makes me think about, it's kind of that way with every mental health difference, if you will, or mental health disorder, right? I'm also bipolar, and I think I've mentioned in other episodes. And like before I knew I was on the spectrum, I knew I was bipolar, and I even felt that way with bipolar, that I had to play by somebody else's rules, that I had to hide the fact that I was manic or that I was depressed. And it was so exhausting on a regular basis trying to make people think I'm okay, then I'm in the middle. I'm like them. I'm not manic and I'm not depressed. Granted, I was never very good at hiding it. Everybody decided to let me know. I was never good at hiding it. But nowadays, I don't even try to hide mania or depression. I mean, I am on medication for it, so it is kind of,
I think
managed,
that,
if you will.
that probably ties into some of the substance abuse stuff, which I think we want to talk about on another episode sometime, is the correlation between autism and substance
Yeah,
abuse. Because we've mentioned it in a few episodes, but we haven't really talked about it too much.
right.
But I think the masking definitely plays a toll.
Well, yeah,
I remember one of the reasons I started drinking heavily quite a bit when I used to drink a lot more than I do now, um, is because I would get mentally and emotionally exhausted, that
right.
I needed something, some type of release. And the way I dealt with that was through alcohol,
Yeah.
or especially in the social environments when you're stressed out, if you're in a place with a lot of people,
Mhm.
it's easy to have a few drinks and then all of a sudden you seem more normal to everybody
Yeah.
because you're more
Yeah.
laid back and relaxed. And
Right.
although I will say that stuff tends to just fall out of my mouth more easily when I'm drunk and would say things to upset people,
Like it does for anybody, right?
but at least I had an excuse for saying the
Right.
shitty things I was saying rather than,
Right.
well, he's drunk, instead of he's
Mhm.
just an asshole.
Yeah. And I actually think I used being an asshole as kind of a guise too, kind of a way to mask over stuff. I mean, I never very heavily got into drinking or anything like that. I mean, I've been a cigarette smoker for most of my life, and I've always like one of the reasons why I think I perpetually continue that is yes, it's an addiction. Got it for anybody who wanted to call that out. But I think one of the reasons too is because it gives me quote unquote valid reason to step away from social situations. It gives me a time to step away from social stuff, and it's okay because like when I've tried to quit and I was like, no, I just need 5 minutes away. People are like, oh my god, are you okay? Are you okay? Yeah, I just need 5 minutes. Leave me alone. Go away. I just
By
need
the
to step
way,
outside.
if any of you have 5 minutes and you're listening, why don't you, and if you're on Spotify in the comment section there, why
Hmm.
don't you tell us some of the ways that you mask? Because
Yes.
I'd like to hear about some of the things that other people do.
Yes. What are the ways in which you have to, do things to kind of deal with
To blend in with
people?
the
Yeah,
normies.
to blend in, or how have you learned how to
How do
manage?
you chameleonize? Is that a
Yeah,
word? No.
camouflage yourself.
Camouflage.
Yeah,
I wanted to say chameleon for some reason,
you
but
really did. You really did.
how do you blend in?
Yeah. How do you get through your day?
So
Because we have ideas, sure, but you're a different human being than
what are
us.
some of the other common ways that people mask their autistic behavior?
I mean, I think one of the ways is a lot of people on the spectrum have tendency to get into like science jobs and like engineering and computers and
So
stuff.
they don't have to interact with people.
Right. It's less interactive with people. I mean, me and you are slightly different in that way because me and you actually want to be social. Like we actually get jazzed up by being
We just suck
social.
at it sometimes.
Yeah, we just kind of suck by their rules. But for our rules, we're good with it. I mean, we are performers. So we want to be social. We want to be in front of people. We want to have attention. And in that regard, like, but that's just another part of who we are as human beings, as well as being those other pieces. Um, yeah, yeah. Let me go to my thing here of examples of masking.
I think one of the ways that I mask, it's also it's an adaptation that is helping me grow in other ways. So it's
Mm,
masking, but it's also helpful and beneficial. So I tend to be somebody who's very detail oriented, and I get lost in the details quite a bit. And when you're working in any sort of business, you need to also be able to take the quote, 30,000 foot view, the eagle's eye view, and
mm,
look at the big picture.
right.
And I think for a lot of people on the spectrum, it's hard to look at the big picture sometimes because you get fixated on small details.
Yeah,
So
I
I
get it.
have to force myself many times to stop and think about the big picture, which I think is actually, even though it's a way of masking my autistic behavior, but it's
Mm,
adapting my behavior in a beneficial way because it also helps me career wise and it helps projects I'm working on. If we're working on this podcast, for instance, you have to think about the meta view, not
mm,
just the minutia.
right. I just read something that I thought was kind of interesting. Um, Hiding or underplaying their own intense interests.
Yeah,
Which I
and that
do
kind of
often.
goes into what I was just saying a little bit, like hyperfixating, but the intense interest thing too. I think I would downplay in a lot of relationships personally, friendships, and also like dating. I
Mhm.
wouldn't necessarily be open and honest about some of the things I was
Right.
hyperfixated on right away. Once I got to know somebody better, I might tell them about some of my obsessions, but
Right.
I didn't want people to know up front because for some people they just, it's weird to them or
Right.
off-putting.
I have tendency to downplay by years ago I used to downplay just by saying like, well, yeah, what do I know? Even though I knew what I was talking about. Like when I'm talking about behavior or something like that, or like internal motivations or something of somebody,
Language,
I would what?
nothing.
Did you just say mind reading?
I said language,
Oh,
but you
language.
made me think of something
Oh,
because of what you're saying. It
yeah.
reminded me of something that people used to um, point out all the time,
Yeah.
especially when I was a kid
Uh-huh.
and I didn't understand. So I started reading very young, and I mentioned this during another episode, but I started reading when I was very young.
Mhm.
So my dad used to buy me a lot of books even before I was in elementary school,
Yes.
and actually started reading before I went into school. So I was reading at 4 years old. I was already reading. Um, so language has always been something that I was. I had a very large vocabulary as a small child.
Right.
And one of the things that's actually strange is I feel like my vocabulary now is worse than it was when I was younger, when I was in school.
Even though that's not possible.
No, well, let me explain.
Okay.
Because I started altering my behavior because I was getting made fun of all the time.
Right.
So I used to speak, and when I was speaking to people, I would use proper English and I would use words that people quote unquote said were big words.
Uh-huh.
And people used to make fun of me for the way that I spoke.
Right.
And so I had to start incorporating slang
Yes.
and colloquialisms. And I started speaking more in a casual way.
Right.
And I had to learn how to speak casually instead of speaking properly all the time.
Right.
And now I feel it's because it's become such a habit
Mm-hmm.
of speaking in a casual way to turn on the professional speaking
Right.
is harder because I'm so used to using saying things like, yeah, dude, bro, like terms like that.
Yeah, colloquial phrases.
Those are things that I wouldn't normally say, or I
Right.
wouldn't use certain phrases. But
Yeah.
now I do, and it becomes so it's become a habit to use
Right.
those things that, like, if I wanted to sound professional, I
Yeah.
have to like think about it now versus when I was a kid, I used to do it naturally and
Mhm.
people made fun of me. They're like, why are you trying to sound smart? I'm like,
Yeah, I used to hear that a lot too.
I'm trying to sound smart.
Yeah.
I'm like, I didn't.
Did you ever have a problem with conjunctions?
No.
So, and this is going to sound weird. Maybe sound weird. Maybe
Conjunctivitis, maybe.
Maybe somebody can relate to this. But I actually like have always kind of struggled with, let's say, using things like can't, don't, won't.
No,
Your.
no, I never had a problem.
Not when I miswrite your, but I've always had a problem with.
Why are you trying to sound so smart, bro?
Right, like
you think you're better than me?
I would rather say, do not opposed to don't. It actually feels more natural and feels better for me to say things like do not.
I think
to don't.
sometimes choosing when to and when not to use conjunctions, you can do it for an artistic emphasis.
Yeah,
but
all of that. I started using them because people were like, why?
I think conjunctions
why do you say it
feel
that
more
way?
casual.
But even
I guess.
when I would write, though, because I write the way I talk, I used to leave out conjunctions.
Do not. If you say do not instead of don't, when you say do not, it sounds like you're trying to emphasize.
I know.
Like,
but that's
do not
just the way I talked for a while.
Throw trash on the ground.
It was uncomfortable to learn like all those colloquial phrases and stuff.
Yeah.
One
people
thing
thought I was trying to like that I was full of myself, and then I was thought I was better than them.
Yeah, I know. I used to.
I still get accused of that, but
yeah,
it's not.
When I started adapting.
It's not intentional unless I don't like you. In which case, I might be trying to make myself. I may be trying to make you feel stupid if I don't like you.
But. I mean, nowadays, when I'm saying something that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to like behavior or whatnot, or like talking about a movie, or I'm talking the interpretation that I have of something, I have tendency to kind of slush off, if you will, my knowledge base about it when I'm talking to other people by saying things like, well, just saying, well, or
not getting too lost in jargon.
Yep.
So that's another thing is I have a tendency to use jargony terms.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example?
Whew. So at one of the jobs that I applied for, which is funny because you would think that most people who run a business would know some of these terms because it's a common, to me anyway, I thought it was a common term, but I used, it's not really it's a jargony term for, what is your, KPI, which is KPI is a acronym, which means key performance indicator.
Oh,
but it's not, I've had a lot of jobs over the years, and KPI is something I've seen in tons of like material and stuff when I've worked for,
never seen that.
If you ever worked for like big corporations, KPI is a common term they use in like corporate environments.
Which ones? I've never once.
I can tell you some of them, but I don't know if I want to tell people every place I've worked at.
Yeah, but like I've never heard that term before, and I've worked in a lot of national corporations.
So the funny thing is, the company I'm telling you about that I applied for, and they said they didn't know what that meant. I had to explain it to them.
Yeah.
But what other website they use that in their internal training material?
Yes, because they're human, man. They don't know.
So it was like, oh, what is that? But then when I went, but there are people running the company.
Yeah,
and when I go onto the website, they actually list, here are our KPIs for the year. So Nick, you're supposed to be following these KPIs to manage your business according to corporate.
Yeah.
But then when I say KPI, you don't even know what it is. Then you're obviously not reading what they're putting out there.
So when you were in that interview and they didn't know what it was, you should have immediately asked for the autistic middle management guy who knows all of that. That's immediately what you should.
All it means is key performance indicator.
Oh.
The KPIs are what, so like KPIs are important when you're a manager, because you need to know how are you measuring whether your employees are doing well or not.
Right.
Because
you're talking about the numbers of performance. Got it.
Well, it's very frustrating when you work for companies that don't have any sort of standards, because then you're like, well, if you say I'm doing a bad job, what does that mean? How do you know I'm doing a bad job?
I mean, every company has standards like that, dude.
Right, but if they're not written down, you can't hold people accountable for them, which is the problem I had with the last place I worked at. Was they would criticize people, but they weren't able to articulate why someone was doing a bad job, or they had nothing to measure it.
Right.
Like you need to be able to measure how somebody's doing.
But for me and you, that makes sense to have an evaluatable.
Right. I mean, but you can't tell somebody you're doing a bad job and then not be able to explain why.
Yeah, but normies don't work that way most.
You say, "Oh, you're doing a bad job," and they're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, but they don't work that way most of the time. Most of the time, they go based on like good, bad. They don't.
I need somebody to explain why I'm doing bad if I'm doing a bad job, especially if I don't know I'm doing a bad job. Because sometimes if I'm doing a bad job, I already know that I suck. But if I don't know that I suck, and you say I suck, well, you better be able to back it up. Because I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Right. And it's not going to help me get better unless you can explain to me how I'm doing bad.
Gotcha. So let's drift out of jobs and let's talk about masking.
Jargon?
No, let's not talk about jargon.
I was just saying jargon is one of those ways that I had to like mask some of my jargony talk.
Right. Let's shift this masking conversation into talking about relationships and masking.
Pretending that you're okay with certain types of physical touch that you're not, or at least putting up with it.
Yeah. Oh, putting up with it. One more of the examples on here of masking: internalizing sensory discomfort.
Right. Not pointing out, hey, what is that? Or what's that sound? Or what's this? Or I'm very sensitive to smells.
Smell.
Yeah. Okay. Smell. Sight doesn't really bother me too much. Sound can.
Right.
It depends.
Interesting. The intensity of light, like natural sunlight, does bother me. But like when we go to the casino and I'm sitting in front of a slot machine, I love all the lights and colors.
No,
I love all the sound and stuff.
I don't know why smells, but if smells are too intense, I've actually puked. If smells are too intense,
the smell was too intense,
or get sick. Yeah. Certain smells will make me vomit.
Okay.
And it doesn't even matter if it's a good smell. It could be a pleasant smell, but if it's too intense, I'll actually vomit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to sensory stuff, really touch is my big deal. Like, I really have an issue with like when people stand too close to me or within proximity of me.
Yeah, I was the opposite. I was the guy who would stand too close to everyone else.
Yeah, I know.
Like not. That's another thing that I had to mask.
Yeah, when you drink, you hug.
So here's the weird thing is certain times like masking behaviors.
Yeah.
Gets to a point where you don't have to mask anymore necessarily because you repeated the same behavior so often that you don't even really think about it. It depends
Right.
on what it is. Like some of the sensory stuff you might not be able to overcome,
Right.
but like the distancing thing for
Mhm.
me, like my natural instinct was to just get really close to people when I talk to them.
Right.
And I had to have many people point out over the years, hey man, you're in my fucking bubble, back
Mhm.
off.
Yeah,
And
probably
then
people like me.
I
Yeah.
I started, distancing myself from people and giving people personal space to the point where I don't even think about it anymore. I just typically give people space.
Right.
But before, like that's something, but it doesn't like it's not masking in a way that wears me out because I
Uh-huh.
don't think about it anymore. I don't have to put that much effort. I just
Yeah.
do it because I changed my behavior to a point where I didn't have to like
Right.
consciously be aware of it.
I mean, but in a way, it's still masking, though. I mean, we got more comfortable with doing it, but
Yeah.
it's still a
I
level
just
of
but it's
masking.
I don't put a lot of effort into it because
Yeah.
I programmed myself by doing it so
Right.
often that I don't even think about it anymore.
Right.
I mean, if I realize I'm in someone's personal space, then I'll be like, all right, I need to back up. But like usually I don't get to that point because I just trained myself from not doing it.
Yeah.
That I just don't.
Yeah. How about suppressing stimming, self-stimulating behaviors? These are repetitive behaviors such as whistling, jumping, finger clicking, etc., which are used by autistic people to help self-regulate and for fun. Yeah. All right. How about that? Are there any that you do?
Um,
Stimming behaviors?
well, I think a lot of the behaviors I do could also be interpreted as like
As stimming?
anxious, like manifestation of anxiety.
Mhm.
So, for instance, I have a tendency to chew on my fingers and bite my nails,
Yeah.
which is also something that people with anxiety do,
Right.
but that's something that I've always done. Um,
I do this thing. Nobody
yeah,
can see me do it, and I get that. I was
touching my hair.
Yep, I do that too. I touch my thumb to my index finger, middle finger, fourth finger, and pinky in a pattern sequentially. I've been doing it for a really, really super long time. And then over time, I did find out that it's actually one of the grounding techniques people can use when they're like have super high emotionality, whether it be anxiety or whatever, they can do that. But I've always just done it when I have moments where I'm feeling odd, let's call it, and I'll just touch my thumb to each tip
So
of my
I don't
finger.
even think I'm aware of all the things that I do. 'Cause usually, if I'm doing things like that, other people are pointing it out to me because they think it's
Ah,
weird.
yeah,
Like I, when I'm home alone, I have a tendency to like stick my hand down my pants a lot. Like, yeah, I put my
like
hand in my
touching
underwear.
yourself.
No, not like sexually, but just
No, I
like,
didn't mean it like that.
yeah, but
Like,
like putting my hand in my underwear,
huh.
like touching my my nuts,
Oh, okay.
like
Yeah.
grabbing my ball sack.
Yeah. All right.
But it's weird
I
because I
mean,
don't
is it
know.
comforting to you?
Yeah, but I don't know
Oh.
why I do it. Why do I keep cupping my own balls?
Well, because okay, for one, any woman who just heard you hear that, heard you say that, automatically went, "Well, you're a guy. Duh, you like
It's
to
not a
touch
sexual
yourself."
thing though. I
But
just have a
no, it's
like,
it's comforting
but
to
it's
you,
repetitive. I keep doing it,
right?
and like my significant other will be like, "Is there something wrong with your balls? Are they itchy?" And I'm like,
It says it
"No."
right here, autistic burnout. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, dude. I didn't
As
mean to cut
opposed to
off your
regular
ball
burnout,
touching
like most of our
conversation there.
listeners who are probably doing drugs. I'm just
Well,
kidding.
yeah. I mean, yeah, that behavior of yours is probably a lot better than a lot of other behaviors people have adapted to kind of
I mean, my main
overcome.
thing was just if I got overwhelmed, and I already mentioned it,
Mhm.
just popping on a video game, which is how I used to deal with a lot of things. If I felt overwhelmed, I would, or if I needed to kind of ground myself, whatever you want to call it, I would just disappear into a video game and not think about anything to
Yeah.
shut my brain
Yeah,
off.
me too. Yeah, get away from even my own thoughts. Here's a question for you because we're talking about masking, and there's some downsides to masking. We talked about autistic burnout. We people sometimes have meltdowns when they've kind of been pushed to their limit. All right, so when it comes to now I get what you were just trying to tell me. So there are downsides to masking too, because people end up, as Steve pointed out, substance use. People have a tendency to like lose their emotional cool and they kind of blow up. Having meltdowns and things. mental health issues can be contributed to too much masking and whatnot, and even suicide can be. So there are some downsides to masking too. But with that being said, is masking inherently bad? Is it a good thing to know how to do? And is there a way for us as autistic people to kind of learn how to strike that balance between when to mask, how to mask, what should we mask, what should we not? Or should people just not mask at all?
Like it depends on the environment and it depends on a lot of different factors.
Okay.
I don't think there's never going to be an easy answer to that because the reality is, like for instance, in the workplace, even if people know you're autistic,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter. People are still going to think it's weird if you do certain things. People aren't going to be understanding. So masking is definitely a beneficial thing in the workplace most of the time.
I
Unless
would
you're
agree.
working by yourself, like Nick says, if you're a scientist or an
Yeah.
engineer working in a lab and you don't have to deal with people. But if you're working with other people, you're going to have to mask at least somewhat in order to get by.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why I think the unemployment rate is so high for people on the spectrum, is just because people don't understand us. They think we're weird. We have a tendency of getting fired for being misunderstood or
Yeah.
communication issues, especially if you work in something like customer service,
Right.
HR, God forbid. I hope no autistic people work in HR, but HR, if you're working in customer service or sales or anything customer facing,
Right.
the way that you speak to people is going to be very important. And a lot of times we'll say things that we don't have any negative intention, or, we intend things to come across a certain way,
Hmm.
and we won't be able to understand why other people are offended by the things we're saying. And obviously from a business standpoint, like how do you, if the person's autistic and you have them doing customer service and they're sending emails to customers and they're saying things in the email that are inappropriate, or not even inappropriate, but just the way they're saying things just
Right.
doesn't seem professional,
Or maybe they're giving too much information that they shouldn't be sharing with customers about
Right.
how business works.
like how do you,
Yeah.
as a company, it can be hard. Like how do you navigate that? Because on one hand, that person may be actually hurting the business, but on the
Yeah,
other
it could
hand,
be.
you have to, you don't want to be discriminatory
Right.
or be too harsh with somebody, but when there's something that's beyond their control or that's limited in their control.
So I want to touch on that a little bit because you're saying all the reasons why other people should be more sensitive to autistic people and why we should be able to not have to mask as much, because you were talking about some of the downsides to it because it could affect employment and stuff like that. I will say, from reading some of the things that I have on Instagram and on Reddit and stuff like that, there is also a bunch of people who are on the spectrum. I'm not going to say a hell of a lot. I'm just going to say a bunch of posts that I read of people who are basically using their autism as a way of saying, "Oh, I just can't get a job." Like there is a balance that needs to be struck between listening to our feelings, not invalidating them, but listening to our feelings and at times ignoring the way we feel. We're going to feel anxiety at certain times. We should feel anxiety at certain times. We're going to feel depressed at certain times, but to always give into that feeling and let it stop you from being able to move forward, like I don't think we should do that. So I think masking can be actually used to help us actually be able to move forward with our goals.
Right. Which
And
is
in
kind of
that
what I was
regard,
saying earlier
oh,
about,
that is what you were saying.
well, sort of like about
Right.
how certain masking behaviors have actually
Right.
helped me.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, forcing myself
Right.
to look at the big picture,
Right.
because other people aren't going to understand why you get so fixated in the details, but also getting fixated in the details can also be a detriment.
Yes.
You're not going to help yourself.
Right.
So yes, it's an autistic behavior to be detail oriented and to
Mhm.
get lost and fixated on certain details. But masking and like forcing yourself to look at the big picture is also a beneficial behavior.
Right. Which is
So
a skill.
sometimes masking can help you grow as a person,
Yes.
even though you're altering your behavior for your own personal benefit as well as to benefit
Right.
the people around you.
Right. You're learning
There's
a
certain
new
things that are
skill
always
set
going to be exhausting,
that.
though, like some of the sensory things.
Right.
If you're somebody who's extremely sensitive to sound,
Right.
then there's not really like, there's not too much you can try to like not make it obvious to people, but there's not really much you can do about that. But there are some things in your control that will actually benefit you by changing or learning to adapt your behavior.
There was one person in particular who posted on Reddit, and they said nobody else can understand. No, it wasn't on Reddit. It was on TikTok. There was a TED Talk lady who did a TED Talk, and most of what the lady said on the TED Talk, real smart lady. But one of the things that she said was that we shouldn't have to, and that no two people's struggles are the same, which is a true statement. No two people's struggle in life is the exact same. And at the same time, um, we can honestly say that some people are far more functional than others. And this one woman, I said something on it to the effect of that, right? That no two people can understand each other's struggle, but we can actually say that some people are far more functional or far more able to take care of themselves than others. And this woman was like, "You don't know how hard it is to be me." And she's right. I have no idea what it is to be her. She identified herself as being female and a certain age and said that she struggled with this all of her life. And I don't doubt that it has been hard for her. I also understand that she's saying, like in her comment to me, she said that she can't work. And I don't necessarily doubt that she can work or not. But she's also saying that she doesn't believe or agree with the functional language around autism because nobody could tell her that she has mild autism.
Well, you
And I
also
don't like people saying mild or heavy autism, something like that.
you don't want to necessarily lean it on as a crutch and use it as an
Right.
excuse not to try to
Right. And we all,
self-improvement, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to
Right.
use it as an excuse not to try anything.
right.
And you say, well, it is the way it is and nothing's ever going to change. You work with people who have substance abuse problems. What if they said the same thing? Well, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm addicted to a certain drug, and that's just the way it is. I can't do anything about it.
And with that kind of what would be referred to as sustained talk or sustained talk or hesitation or resistance.
I'm
to
not saying
treatment.
that an addiction is the same as being autistic, because
Well, I would say there's
you
a
can
lot of similarities.
you can do something more. Like, you can't cure autism, and I'm not saying you can cure addiction, because people who have addiction problems tend to fall into other addictions and stuff like that.
You
But
were
what I'm
so
saying
close
is
to saying it.
there's more you can do easily about addiction. You're not
Mhm.
born necessarily as an addict. You become an addict. I'm not talking about like,
no, you don't need to defend. Keep going.
I'm saying like when you get I'm talking about more specifically,
Yes, I
like
know.
if you're addicted to a specific
Yes.
substance,
I understand.
it's not the same as somebody who's born autistic.
Right.
Um,
I agree. It's just the way the person on the TikTok presented it. She was trying.
I would
to
just
say,
use it as an example.
the way the person in the TikTok or the TED Talk that was on TikTok was presenting it was basically saying that nobody can use that function language because nobody else gets to decide how hard somebody's life is. And that's true on the surface, but very straightforward. And I want to make sure that I'm kind of clear with this, and hopefully I'm going to say this as clear as I can. I look at things like this. There are people on the spectrum who are very low functioning on the spectrum. They're very low functioning human beings, and I don't mean they're lesser human beings. And and I'm not saying they don't deserve respect and dignity and the same rights as everybody else. What I'm saying is that somebody who needs an at-home supervisor or at-home care worker, or constantly needs somebody to take care of them, or if they need to live in a specific place because they need to be taken care of and watched over by somebody, is far less functional than somebody who doesn't need those things. So if you're somebody who's on the spectrum and you deal with anxiety and depression and of a varying degree of those things, but you're still capable of showering, still capable of making your own food, still capable of not, I don't know, getting lost in your own head to the point where you wander out into traffic. If you're capable of doing all those things, I'm not saying you are doing those things, but if you're capable of doing all of those things on your own, then you're far more functional than somebody who needs a care worker. Now, I say that, and I don't want people to think like I'm picking on somebody or whatnot. We all need help. We all need assistance in some way, right? Like, I wear glasses. I have glasses on my face. That is my assistant aid to help me be more functional in life. Without my glasses, I would be very unfunctional or very lacking in functionality comparatively to other people, because I couldn't be able to drive. I wouldn't be able to get a job. I wouldn't be able to do a lot of things. But because I wear glasses, I can. I have an assistance aid to help with that. But some people sit back and say, well, how can you say how functional I am in life? Well, if your ass can roll out of bed, and I'm not saying you're choosing to shower every day, but if you're able If you physically are able to get your ass in a shower every day, then you're far more functional than somebody who has to be reminded at least once a week to go do it. If you're somebody who doesn't need somebody to help them shower, help them make food, remind you to turn off the stove, you are far more functional in life than somebody who needs those reminders. And that doesn't make either one of us better or worse at being a human. It doesn't make us any more deserving of more respect or less respect. We're all human. We all deserve that. But we also need to be able to differentiate between people who need more help and people who need less help. Like me and Steve do not need a caretaker. We do not need a care worker.
I mean, that's arguable.
It is kind of arguable. But we don't need that thing, that person, or we don't need to live with our parents until we're 50 or 60 years old. And if you're somebody who lives in your parents' basement, I'm not making fun of you at all. I don't know the situation that put you there. I don't know.
It's much more common nowadays with the way the economy is.
That's true too.
Apartments being outrageous. It's common for people to still be with their parents in their late 20s because the cost of living is so high.
Situation. Like I think I've said this before on the podcast. I have a daughter who's on the spectrum, and she is, and I'm not insulting my daughter in any way, shape, or form. I don't want nobody to misunderstand that. But she's lower on the function than I am. And when I'm saying that, it's because I know that she's going to be living with me and her mother for the rest of our lives. I know that, and I love the fact that she is, because she's absolutely wonderful. I love it when she starts scripting like Cinderella and she wants to dance with me in the living room. That's wonderful. But she will always need us to be there to help her through things. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with her because she needs that. But she is definitely less functional than I am because I don't need that person. Although sometimes my wife does have to translate Nick language to everybody else so they don't think I'm just being a horrible asshole all the time. I'm only being an asshole some of the time.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to bring it back to something that you mentioned before. You had mentioned that there was a woman who said that she doesn't think anybody should have to mask their behavior.
Right.
And I think when it comes to me, I look at it in a pragmatic way. I think there are certain things that you might not be able to hide or mask.
Right.
And there are certain things that it might benefit you to and that maybe you should.
Right.
Or at least try.
For a period of time. Not always. Not try to make it go away or ignore it.
Right.
I'm with you on this, Steve.
I think it's a pragmatic. It's not a black or white thing.
Right. It's all about getting what you need out of something.
Like I was saying before, some of the sensory things, maybe some of that you can't really hide or control very well, but other things you can make an effort, like me not invading people's personal space or me trying not to always be so fixated on details and trying to look at the big picture.
Or me constantly analyzing people's behavior and pointing it out to them.
And telling them why they suck.
And I try not to do that anymore.
Before we wrap up today, this 45 minutes or so has gone by pretty quick.
It has.
But it's been kind of a serious discussion today. We didn't really laugh and joke around as much as normal, which is fine.
Yeah.
But to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, have you eaten any good hot dogs lately?
All right. So anybody who's gone on to our Facebook page, our TikTok page, did you put it on TikTok?
Yeah.
Okay. TikTok, YouTube, Facebook Instagram pages. Steve put up a video from one of our previous episodes, and he's going to put up a video for this one too. And they're just little shorts. And he uses a quote of it, but it's a video of him talking about how I probably have colon cancer from all the fucking hot dogs I eat. Or used to eat.
An ungodly amount of hot dogs.
It was an ungodly amount of meat.
All right, here's the joke for you. I put my grandmother on speed dial. I call it Instagram.
Jesus.
There you go.
So we always like to end our episodes with Steve doing a little bit of a joke. What I will say is, if you heard us say something in this episode that you liked, you disliked, you disagreed with, you want to argue about any of that kind of stuff, please put a comment on whatever service you're listening to the podcast on. Put a comment, put a question. Let me know if you disagree with me. I'm cool with that. Let's have a conversation about it, because I think that's one thing in the autistic world currently that is not really being had. It's not real conversations. It's one group of people trying to dictate how another group of people in the autism world is going to talk about it and how we view it and what we're talking about and how we're talking about it. And I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah, if you got a message, something you want us to talk about, if maybe you think you might make a good guest or something,
that'd be great.
You can send us a voice message through Spotify. You can leave us a comment, or you can yeah, just send us a message. Let us know something you want to hear about, or we've had a few people that might be on in the future. We've been speaking to some other people out there in the ether who are on the spectrum
Absolutely.
who have interesting stories. So we'd like to hear from you.
Absolutely. Um, I would like to point out a certain podcast run by an autistic gentleman as well. I really enjoyed the podcast. He had a great episode with Mick Foley, who was a former professional wrestler. But the podcast is called Autism Rocks and Rolls. It's a nice little podcast. I enjoyed listening to a bunch of episodes. It was kind of cool. Check it out if you can. Like, follow, subscribe on all of our services for our podcast itself. We want to keep being able to provide this for you. And as always, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
So nice of you.